Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students, and a very good day to all of you. If we talk about the previous lectures, after giving you an overview of how we're going to proceed within the course, we started with giving you a general introduction of report, followed by discussing its detailed structure, and after giving you some appropriate examples, we have moved onwards with the specific types of reports which are used in different scenarios in the light of different contexts which are provided and which are assigned to an individual who has to prepare and draft a report. But the process of writing itself is not just restricted to report writing. It's one component of a big term that we are going to discuss in our today's lecture. Just talking about the previous lectures, we talked in detail about different sections and we discussed these points within detail alongside some different examples to clarify your ideas. But when we talk about the communication process itself, this is basically the major cycle which begins at the very outset of life when a child starts cooing and babbling. This is the very beginning of the communication process, because that child becomes the sender and his or her parents are the receiver. And this is not the end of the information, but again the child gets a response from the parents as well. So a two-way process begins at the very beginning of life, and that is basically the communication process. With the passage of time, this communication process becomes more complex. The choice of words increases within the mind. Child starts and begins to acquire new set of words which can be used within different situations and different environments. With the passage of time, that use of language is not just restricted to the utterance of one word or two words, but gradually the child learns to combine and join different words into phrases and clauses which make a good sense. And the receivers of that knowledge are also getting a good idea that now that child has started to become a good interlocutor and a good communicator. So overall, you are getting an idea that the communication process and the cycle of this communication begins at the very beginning of life. And with the passage of time, it becomes more and more complex. Then a phase comes within our lives when we are not just restricted to the oral communication. Now this communication transforms into the written communication, a form of communication which remains permanent. Now why am I calling this thing permanent? Because if we look back in time, there was no manner and no mode of preserving your oral language. Although nowadays we do have recorders, we have different modes of saving your voice, we have different media. Now there is a way of preserving this language, but back in time only the written communication was considered as the one which is preserved. And due to the same reason, if you look back in time, talking about the archaeology, so we have different forms of written communication under different caves in the form of different tablets. I'm calling those specific pieces of rocks on which we have carvings. And those carvings are not just designs, those are specific languages which were used by the people of that time. And they were basically trying to preserve their culture, preserve their knowledge for the upcoming generations which were coming right after their own age. So they tried to do a communication with the upcoming generations as well. But although with the passage of time, language evolved, changed its form, lost so many speakers and users of that language, and that's why many of us are unable to understand what basically is meant by those forms which are written within those tablets. But the basic point remains the same, that they considered it to be a preserved form of language, and that is why it was used extensively within their time as well. Due to the same reason, I am calling it as well as an advanced form of communication. More modified, more specific, more extensive. And due to the same reason, we divide language within 4 skills. And if you have a command within all these 4 skills, only then you are considered to be a good interlocutor and a good user of language. That's why we have these different assessment tests as well. We have TOEFL, and then you also get a training in the form of TOEFL. Then we have this test known as IELTS or IELTS, taken by different organizations. So these are the different modes through which all of your 4 skills are basically tested. So generally talking about these 4 skills, to basically give you a general idea, we divide them into 2 categories. We have the receptive skills and we have the productive skills. When I talk about the receptive skills, basically these are the ones in which the knowledge and the information is coming towards you, towards the person who is the focal point, with reference to whom we are talking about these 4 skills. Let's suppose I'm the person whose 4 skills are being discussed, whether they are poor or weak. So if I talk about my receptive skills, so I would say those skills through which knowledge is, or the information is coming towards me. So if we look within the screen, we have listening, we have speaking, we have reading and writing. So it is clearly evident that from the first figure, you have an ear used for listening. You basically receive the information in the form of sound waves coming towards your ear. So, well understood that basically listening is a receptive skills through which you receive the information. So one thing becomes clear, that listening is your receptive skill. Moving onwards, if you look at the next figure, which is of speaking, the speaking makes a clear sense that you are the one uttering the information, going from you towards your target audience, to whom you are referring to or with whom you are discussing a topic or any other concept. So it won't be considered under the heading of receptive skill. But when we move ahead and talk about the next figure, which is of reading, so over here you can see the eye is basically the receptor through which you are trying to go through an information which is provided to you in the form of a text, and after reading that text you develop an idea what that text is about. So the text is going towards your brain to develop an understanding using the eye. So once again, this eye basically becomes the receiver of information, and that's how it is another example of receptive skills. Now when the receptive skills are clear, and based on these receptive skills, you will develop your productive skills. The skills which are used to develop and transfer information towards your other interlocutors with whom you are having an interaction. So based on this discussion, we can say that the rest of the two figures, among which we have the speaking and writing, belong to your productive skills. We talk about speaking, so you are the one uttering the information and your receivers are getting the information, your target audience. So they will be the one listening, meaning their receptive skills are being used, whereas you talk about yourself, so you are using your productive skills. And finally, coming towards your writing. As we discussed earlier, writing, the basic step, the first step towards moving to your complex communication process. So it is the most advanced form of communication and productive skills, and which is based on the first three, because starting from your listening, you're going to develop the basic choice of words. You will learn how language is used at the very outset. Then, based on that listening, you develop your speaking. So listening develops your speaking. Then, with the passage of time, within your school age as well, you start to learn how to read. And this reading basically although acts as a receptive skill, but will develop finally your writing skill. So this reading will enhance your writing skills. And finally, your most advanced form of productive skill will be transferring the information at the end. So although it becomes and it develops at the very end of enhancing and polishing all your other skills, but it is the most advanced form of language skill, which is developed at the very end of the communication process. This will be the target within our upcoming lectures as well, and particularly within our today's lecture as well. Writing is of different types, and it depends on basically the environment in which you're going to use this language skill. We talked earlier within our initial lectures as well that there are different forms of writing based on the given context and your own set of goals and objectives that you want to achieve, and the context basically under which you have to produce your writing. So you have a specific format within which you have to prepare your draft. And keeping in view all these fundamental factors, then you prepare or draft your text. Now making it more specific and relating it with our basic course of report writing. Report writing basically belongs to this broad term of technical writing. One component. But there are separate other components as well. So how to generalize the overall discussion? So first you need to know what basically is technical writing. If you look at the word itself, you will know what kind of writing it is referring to. Technical, related to something scientific, a form of writing which involves the use of scientific method, and within the scientific method we have certain steps through which we try to explain a concept. This is the same thing which you need to consider, and it's a good tip for you as well, that whenever you have a term, let's suppose you have a compound word, a word which has two separate words and together they make a meaning. So try to look towards the individual meaning of those two separate words, and it will give you a hint or a clue in most of the equation that this is the probable meaning of this term. And now, after talking about the technical writing itself, the way we have inferred the meaning, we have deduced the meaning out of it, you are quite close to the basic concept itself. We have some good definitions as well to basically enhance that general understanding which is developed within your mind. Looking towards the definition provided by Merriam-Webster's dictionary. So, a form of writing involving special knowledge and use of language, etc., that is used or understood by experts, but usually not by the others. So, very self-explanatory, very comprehensive, and a very interesting definition if you look into it, what basically is there within this definition. If you look at it, involving special knowledge. So it's not an ordinary knowledge that we are talking about. For example, you generally have a gossip, you generally have a discussion, but this is something which is based on objectives. If you are talking about some special knowledge, that means that there is a motive behind the sharing and the dissemination of that special knowledge. There was a goal and there was an objective, and based on that objective you have started to share that special knowledge, and with the use of that special language as well. That's why there is a comma as well. That is not just restricted to the dissemination of knowledge could be shared, but there has to be a specific language which should be used to transfer that special knowledge. And that's why we have these two terms together before the etc. Now what's coming next? That is used or understood by the experts, but usually not by the others. Now this thing has basically, this section of this definition has also bifurcated your general group of audience into two groups. The ones which are the target audience and the ones which are the general readers, who are not going to understand what basically this is all about. To understand this technical information, you need the basics or the general understanding of that information. If you have the basics, you would know what this is about, and you would be able to understand and apply the set of rules or that information which is provided to you using that technical writing. So, dividing you into two groups, and secondly providing that special knowledge, and lastly talking about that special language which is also used to convey that information are some of the factors which turns that text into a technical writing. If we move ahead and look into the definition provided by Cambridge Dictionary, so it's relating to the knowledge, machines, or methods used in science and the industry. So the first one was a bit more general definition, giving you an idea what a technical writing generally is. And the second definition is trying to make it more specific for you to understand that what it basically deals with. Now just think of the point I told you earlier, that if you look at these two words, technical writing, so it will make a general sense that it's a form of writing which is technical or related to something technical or technology. So now if you look at the second definition, it will give you a general idea that although it's a knowledge, but of what? Knowledge of the machines and of the methods which are used within science and the industry to develop those machines, or to use those machines, or to apply those machines in a better way. So this is the basic link between machines and knowledge, which is developed using technical writing. So hopefully you have understood the basic concept underlying within these terms or within this form of writing. Hopefully, based on this discussion, I can say that even now, if you are given a situation to write a paragraph, not just a definition, but even a paragraph on what technical writing is, you should be able to do it. Just remember that first, you can discuss technical writing in general, and when I say general, you just have to move what this knowledge is, for whom this knowledge is, and how to convey it. And then if you want to make it more specific, then you can simply relate machines with knowledge, that it's a form of writing which develops a link between knowledge and machines, because after all it is knowledge of machines, of manufacturing them, or of using them, or of making them better. Now look at this concept, what basically it does. I'll be providing some of the more detail of what basically technical writing does. So if you look at the bullet and focus on the points in red, it will clarify the basic definition and the concept of technical writing. It communicates specific and factual information to a defined audience for a defined purpose. And the same things are also written within the provided diagram and the model as well. So if you look at itself, the first point to focus is that it is communicating a specific information. And by specific, we mean that we do not require the general information, because the general information is for the general audience. In a manner, you have text in newspapers in the form of the details provided in different reports, but that is the general information. But when we say we need specific information, that means that you have a subject, you have a subject matter, you have a topic, and you have to stick to that topic rather than going into the accessory details which may divert and distract your audience. You have to keep things very specific. You have to stay and restrict yourself to the particular topic that you are dealing with. That is how you make your content and your writing more specific rather than being more generic and general. The next point to focus is within the definition as well, that is factual. Is factual information. And what do we mean by factual information? Once again, the information which is based on facts, figures, statistics, and evidence. We are not building here castles in the air. We are not assuming and presuming things, because in both cases we are basically trying to be moving towards conjecture. There is the element of wild guess as well. There is the element of probability within your point that you have raised or that you are trying to discuss. These are the things which are to be avoided when we talk about technical writing in journal. Because we have to keep things very specific, and when you want to be very particular about a topic, then there is no space for any guess or any conjecture or any probability. You have to be very focused when you talk about technical writing. And you can only stay focused if you have the basic point to defend your stance. And those evidence are basically in the form of the figures, the graphs, the charts, the histograms. These are the things which are going to support your evidence, which would become the supporting evidence for your stance. And your audience won't have a space to question you or to criticize you. They will have no other option except the acceptance of the content itself. So that is how you communicate specific and factual information using technical writing. The next thing to focus on is your defined audience. Now try to relate it when we talk about the report writing itself. And you will find the connection that we talked about earlier. That when you have to move towards the actual process of report writing, keep in mind the nature of the audience. And we divided them into 3 categories as well. And based on those 3 categories, we also recommended the manner in which you need to structure your report. Well, here once again, you need to keep in mind your audience. What is your defined audience? And what is their basic objective? What is the thing that they are expecting from you to get? Let's suppose if we talk about your audience is basically your employer who has given you a task. Let's suppose giving you a problem or an issue to study by using a survey and then asking you to provide a survey report. So now if you are aware of who is your audience and what he or she expects from you, keeping in view that defined audience, that is how you need to structure your technical writing. So these are the factors which are going to determine how you are going to prepare your content, how you're going to structure your report. So remember, when we talk about the provision of that specific factual information, it has to be provided keeping in view the nature of your defined audience as well. And once you know who is your target audience, then you must be very sure what is the basic purpose of carrying out that activity of writing. Because when we say the form of talking about technical writing in journal, so technical writing has different types that we are going to discuss within a couple of minutes, and you will see how the objectives or how the purpose changes in different forms of technical writing based on your audience. and based on that audience, your factual information would also change. This is the connection between these three factors, and these three together form that triangle of preparing your technical writing draft. So you have to focus on each and every point. You have to remember these points, and only then you would become a good writer of technical writing. Providing you another good example. Now just look at the manner where this technical writing could be used. Before coming to that figure which is provided in the lower half of this slide, just look at the upper half where we have these three circles. They are basically developing that link for you to understand how you can work on this technical writing, or how you can work on it, how you can sharpen your technical writing skills. First thing to focus on is that you need to provide some technical information as well. Based on your objective, it has to be technical information. Second, of course, is that it should reveal that it's basically based on some knowledge. Let's suppose your text is being read by your audience. So at the end of the day, after reading that text, they should simply say that really at the end we got the information we were looking for. This was the knowledge we were seeking. So these two together would form the technical knowledge, and the mode of transferring that information would be the written. Because let's suppose if I am just giving you, acting as a manual of using an appliance, if I just tell you orally each and every step, I don't think you'd be able to remember it the first time when I tell you all the steps to follow to use that machine or an appliance. Again, you will be seeking some user manual or a user guide where you can see all the steps in written. Again, the significance of written communication is here. You won't be able to use it unless you know how to follow the steps. So that is how technical writing becomes important and varies from situation to situation. Now looking below at the figure and the diagram that we have, you can see that if you are that individual at the center, your situations would change based on the overall scenario and your objectives, making it more particular and specific, your basic purpose. The purpose is changing throughout this circle. We can say that if you are a trainer or if you are a trainee, so the mode in which you receive the information would be very different over here. I'm sure you would have received and will be receiving different trainings based on the objectives or the workplace in which you are working. So just look at the manner in which you will be receiving that training. You shall be provided with a schedule of how that training will proceed. What is the basic motive of that training? What will you be getting out of that training? So within that training, there are different steps, and you will be made well aware of each and every step or phase of that training. And that will also happen using your technical writing. Just one use of technical writing. And look at the manner in which the whole situation is dependent upon the context in which that technical writing is supposed to be written. Then, of course, making it more online, the manner in which you are right now listening to the lecture, viewing the lecture, following my points. So a webinar is also quite similar to the kind of environment in which we are interacting right now. A webinar is also designed and prepared based on some objectives. And these objectives will not be the same as we have in a physical training, because the persons who are interacting or the persons who are involved in this process of training would have a different environment in which they'll be able to respond in a different way compared to the manner in which you can do online. So the objectives would be established and structured based on the environment in which you are carrying out an activity. So your webinar would have a different mode of technical writing. Then there are also some situations after, let's say, I can mark it for myself as well. If I say webinar is complete and talking about documentation. So within an official environment, there are different documents which are supposed to be prepared within a given timeline. And that documentation is also not prepared within general writing, but of course there is a format which has to be followed within this process, within a workplace environment. Even let's say if you have to send an official letter, you have a letterhead, and that letterhead becomes the first foundation of your technical writing, that it becomes official when it is provided. The letter simply is making sense when the text is written over the cover letter or the letterhead. So it is the first step, and that is how you do all the documentation within the official environment. So once again, the objectives are changing when we talk about the technical writing. Then talking about the quality assurance, that is also done using some technical writing procedures. Then your planning, you have seen such charts, the blueprints of different buildings which are to be constructed in nearby future. So all that information which is provided within that chart is also very comprehensive, provided with statistics, with figures, with some details of lengths and widths of different components of a building. So all these things within a single chart, and are not the same as the kind of information, though technical, but provided in case of a webinar or documentation or a training. So just look at the manner in which this situation or the scenario is also changing the form of that technical writing. Although it's the same technical writing, but the manner in which it is communicating that specific factual information is changing based on that defined purpose and the defined audience. So that is how this strategic meeting would also be different, as it would have different objectives and motives compared to the planning of some building or construction. It would be different from this quality assurance, and so on and so forth. But these are the points to consider when we talk about technical writing. Just look at the manner in which these different situations and context have changed the overall structure and motives of technical writing. These are the points which are required to be considered when we look into the detail of the technical writing, and we'll be gradually moving towards this detail. Now these are also the forms of writing that you deal with within your professional life. You have the kind of writing in which you basically are supposed to do working in a professional environment. It could be of any form. Then talking about the business writing, the kind or the form of writing in which you really mean business, and it is done in a business setting, in a business scenario for a letter. Then talking about the occupational writing, it is also the kind of writing that you do based on your occupation or your profession or your job. Like this writing is part of your job. So I'm not dividing them into separate categories, but basically I am trying to connect them with a basic form, and that is technical writing. All these fundamental writings are one way or another connected with the main one, which is technical writing. It's not a separate one. When you know technical writing, you would know how to relate it with your professional writing, because it's part of your profession, it's part of your occupation. And technical writing is usually done, as we have discussed in detail talking about report writing, that it has to be based on the fundamental factors of technical writing. Your report is prepared when you mean business, when you have to convey the information to your employer and to other people who are your colleagues, clients, vendors. So there are multiple different types of audience which are involved within this communication process, and being part of that process, they become part of that business setting, and then you require a business form of writing to convey your information to each and every one of them, and then you do it using technical writing. So all three come basically under the main domain of technical writing, and that is how it becomes important. If you look at the basic definition, although the first few points are the same that we have discussed in detail, but let's go through it to have a good idea to understand this technical writing in a better way. Technical writing conveys specific information about a technical subject to a specific audience. So the point to consider here is that what basically it is doing, it is providing that specific information. Talking about specific, looking back into some other definition we talk about, we can say that it is that special knowledge we are dealing with, and it is related to the technical subject. Now talking about technical subject, we will look back into the previous slides and talk about the second definition I provided. So it was a linkage between knowledge and the machines. So the machine's knowledge is basically one way or another the technical subject, and again the point comes that to a specific audience. So our audience is defined, and based on that defined audience we define our purpose, and once the purpose is sure and we are well aware of it, that is how we structure our technical writing. So this is what you extract from the first few lines. The words and graphics of technical writing are meant to be practical. That is, to communicate a body of factual information that will help an audience understand a subject or carry out a task. So before moving on to the explanation of all the lines, just look at this one and relate it back to the process of report writing. You will find something familiar. What did I tell you at what is the basic purpose once we have written the report? What is the basic outcome? Yes, we relate it with the target audience, that once they go through the report, they initiate an action, because the report is written to convince them, to change their own perspectives, and once the ideologies, outlook and perspectives are different, they are going to initiate an action after taking a mutual decision, a decision based on reciprocal discussion. So this is the basic thing to consider when we talk about the technical writing, that you have to carry out a task, and for making it successful you provide set of instructions, some details, some factual information. And when I say factual information, that is the thing which basically makes that writing more practical, target oriented. So these are some of the points which are the basic components and the factors or the characteristics of technical writing. Now talking about the origin, although we have discussed the origin of writing itself, but when we say the origin of writing and trying to relate it to different tablets, the different carvings that we have, so that is just a reference of the writing skill itself. But when we say technical writing and how did it begin, or is it something which has just started recently with the advent of science and information technology? That is not the case. Otherwise, you will stay restricted to the 20th century and so on, moving onwards, the 21st century, the developments which are happening. That is not the case. You have to look back in time as well, because this critical thinking was there all the time. You talk about meditation, you talk about introspection, or the thinking itself. If you're thinking, so you will observe your surroundings. And once you observe, you are going to find certain results. If you look at the process of research itself, things are there in front of you. The things which are there, you try to extract a problem out of it. And once you identify that problem, you state it before your audience as well. And then, once you convince your audience that it really exists as an issue, you try to resolve it. This is the point to consider when we talk about the origin of technical writing as well. It's the same procedure which has been repeating itself off and on in different scenarios by different people of different times. And I have just written the name of just the ones whom I consider important because of their developments, their contribution. Talking about Da Vinci, although he's known and very famous for his paintings, but one thing which gave him the fame when it comes to the reference of technical writing is that concept of helicopter. He was the first person to develop that figure and to simply define and explain the mechanism in which this machine is going to work, how it can be used. He was the first one. Now, just giving a concept of a new machine, although it came into existence and it developed quite late compared to his time, but he tried to describe the concept and the working of that helicopter quite earlier. And the manner in which it was done would one way or another become technical writing. Because it is dealing with what? A helicopter. And what is a helicopter? A machine. And now look back to the definition. The form of writing which is linking knowledge with machines. So that is how this process has been repeating itself. Although sometimes we are aware of it, sometimes not. But that is how it is. One example. Talking about Copernicus and talking about the basic theory of heliocentric theory. Back in time, we had another theory as well, which is known as the geocentric theory. You'll be wondering why I'm taking you towards astronomy and all that, but we are dealing with technical writing, and technical writing relates to science and machines and their usage and their application. So that is why there is a touch of science as well. You may like it, or if it seems confusing, you can Google it to find the details of these concepts as well. So earlier we had this geocentric theory in which this is the Earth and all the stars, including the sun, are evolving around it, round and round and round. And this is basically the center. But then all changed when Copernicus came forward and provided the heliocentric theory, according to which the Earth was no longer the center. On the contrary, the recommendation was of the sun came forward. That sun is basically the center if we talk about our own solar system, and Earth is just one of those planets which is revolving around it. And that is how we have this shift of day and night cycle of 24 hours. Then once again, this explanation also required a form of information and form of knowledge that is more technical and based on facts and figures. So those facts and figures and statistics were also provided by him. But again, it needed some other evidence as well, and that came by Galileo, who came up with this new invention of the telescope, and through that telescope, movement of different stars, the moon, the different natural satellites were observed, were studied in detail, and based on those findings, and then we have different experiments, the astronauts being sent on space. So they have also observed the movement by leaving some international space stations which are revolving around the Earth. So these are all the different factors which played an influential role to corroborate the findings of Copernicus as proven by the device of Galileo. So apart from that history, what basically is happening, that the explanation of all these points that I have just mentioned earlier, although I was also becoming a part of me, I would say, was becoming or trying to become more technical because it required the explanation. So have you noticed the manner in which my language itself changed? This is technical communication, and when it is written, it becomes technical writing. So this is the basic point to consider here. And now look at the time in which all these developments were happening. The elements of past, way past. So the origin could be dated back to these times as well. It has existed in different forms. These are some of the ones which have been preserved and which can be related to when we talk about the origin of technical writing itself. But I can say there are still many developments, many inventions which have gone back in time, which cannot be observed because they are under the ground, become fossilized. Many things cannot be even extracted by the archaeologist. But although I can say there were things back in time, and people of those times have started to jot them down in their own ways of writing, and that would have been, of course, the technical writing. But staying in the present time, these are some of the findings and some of the forms of writing which can be connected with the present form of technical writing. Then some of the other factors which have enhanced this form of technical writing is the increasing literacy. Because you can simply say that if you know one thing and if you die, that information will also die along with you. And you would never want to do such a thing. You would of course want that your work can be extended by your upcoming posterity and your upcoming generations. It should not just stay restricted to ancestors, predecessors. You want that thing to continue, and for that purpose you also require technical writing, and that is how it developed as well. With the expanding need of literacy, with this literacy expanding, there was a need of explaining the mechanical processes. You had an increasing population as well. Within some new younger generation wants to learn about these mechanical processes. They have this passion and they want to know about it. So keeping in view all those factors, you want this dissemination of technical writing and technical information as well. And this also became a factor of the expanding boom of technical writing. Then this also was an important factor if we talk about the Second World War. The manner which began and continued within 1940s. So we had massacre, we had terrible loss of lives. The death toll was in big figures, can't be even mentioned and explained. But one thing which was becoming a cause was the atomic and nuclear explosions as well. And if we talk about these nuclear explosions, so it basically involves a scientific method, and it's basically nuclear fission reaction. A nuclear fission reaction, although the physicist would know what basically happens within it, but in some part of my life, I guess within intermediate, while I was studying physics, so I came across these terms: nuclear fission reaction, nuclear fusion reaction. Most probably, if I'm not wrong, in case of nuclear fusion reaction, you have this hydrogen bomb, even more lethal and having drastic effects. But if we talk about the fission reaction, so having this procedure of colliding different nuclei, the small particles which are inside the atom, so you collide them and then you get a big amount of energy which is released in the form of heat, and that heat then increases with the chain reaction which starts. So once again, look at the manner. This is technical communication in which I'm trying to convey that scientific knowledge. And with this Second World War and the aftermath, the after effects in which so many lives were lost, so there was a need to maintain a check. Like this is the explanation which the superpowers give, that there is a need to control and check the use and the transfer of this information of preparing the nuclear weapons. So it will be checked, it will be controlled, it will be minimized, so that there may not be the case of another nuclear war. And in order to avoid it, although in certain circumstances, and if the use of nuclear energy is positive, for example the development of electricity, so for that purpose this information will be provided. But in case of its negative use, let's say in the form of preparing atomic and nuclear bombs, so it will be checked. But for the positive use, of course, there has to be a channel. And once again, the procedure will be provided, and that procedure will be done using technical writing. So this is also another use and another reason of the development and the enhancement of technical writing. And lastly, being part of ComSets and the information technology, the boost that you see around you, the development of artificial intelligence and so many other technologies which have surrounded you. So people have started to develop an interest to learn this field and to just become part of it, or to make it part of their own lives. They want to use all the applications of the gadgets and the tools which are around them. We all want to use. We have a smartphone within our pockets. We always have it. We try to use it. We try to download different new applications. We try to become part of each and every software. So you can see the manner we have become part of this chain which is coming within our surrounding. So it all begins with this boost known as the computer revolution, turning this whole globe into a global village. That's why we call it as a global village after this arrival of the internet. So you can see all the development happening in front of you, and these are the changes which have simply increased the demand of this technical writing, and that is why it becomes important and another factor due to which technical writing has gained the significance which it has nowadays. So these are some of the factors that now have been explained generally, and keeping in view these factors, you can look into the different forms of technical writing that we are going to discuss.